Welcome to Toffee TV. I'm here today with Simon Hart, who is the author of the new book, Here We Go, which talks about the glory days, which, Simon, it's just what we need at the moment. We need a bit of glory, because it hasn't been the best week, has it? Just getting beat 5-0. But how did you get into this book? Because obviously it's a fantastic time, this, for Everton Football Club. It's most glorious time, and although we hear all the stories and you go to after dinner things and you hear about all the players, it's not something that's been put together as comprehensively as been in this book.
Thank you. How did I get into it? I actually had the idea originally in 2010 and sort of put a proposal to a publisher, and nothing came of that, because I'd read Andy Mitton's got a book on Manchester United in the 80's, which is a similar format, feature chapter length interviews with 11-12 people. There's the Liverpool book Simon Hughes had done, Red Machine, which
they've got a book on everything then,
which I did enjoy, despite the subject matter. So I'd seen other clubs had done that, and Everton hadn't had one, and it was a conversation with Simon actually. I'm afraid I've got to credit a Liverpool fan slightly. Simon does some work part-time for the Coubertin, the publisher, and we had a chat in the summer before last, and he said, why didn't we do this about Everton? And I didn't have to discuss a contract or anything. It was I bit his hand off really. So it started August 2015, and then the process began of going and meeting some of these players and interviewing them.
As you say, it's not really something that's been done. You're an Evertonian yourself. Before what are your memories of this time? Rather than I know you got all the players, but what are your memories of this time?
Lecoq's Batif tracksuits, half-term hang around outside Belfield, being in the paddock, completely packed paddock, loads of people swearing, cigarette smoke, that kind of thing, and hearing people sing Champions, which obviously we haven't heard for 30 years now. So just, I was in my first year secondary school when they won the league in 84-85. So it's a really exciting time, because kind of with the world's opening up anyway, and then when those boyhood heroes turn out to be really, really good, and win the league, and it was just incredibly exciting.
It does seem a strange time, because I was thinking about the other day, and I was thinking, oh my god, it's 30 years since the last time we won the league, and when you put that into context, it's just incredible, because you start. My mind, I start thinking about other clubs then who haven't won. There has been times where you mock clubs like Newcastle for not winning for a long time, and you think we're starting to hit that period now where it does seem so long ago. But it was a mad time, because football was just starting to emerge, and you talk about things like replica kits. That was sort of the start of replica kits, and we all had the Lecoq Sportif and home and away and the trackies. But even that wasn't like you couldn't get them everywhere, and it was so niche, and it was just all starting, and it seems to be the start of the football revolution, but it came and went so quickly as well, and that's for me is the most annoying thing.
It was just before the revolution, really. To profit in the way Man United did. Early 90s when the boom happened and they were in the right place at the right time. As we know, the European ban was there, which didn't help, and we don't know what might have been. But one thing in terms of the difference economically with football then and now, a stat that's in the book, the average top flight salary 30 years ago, 86-87, the average working man was earning 40% of what the average top flight player was earning, whereas by 2010 it was 2.9% or something. So that just shows the gulf that's grown since then, and maybe that's why we look back a bit more fondly, at least slightly older farts, because there was less of a gap, I think. But
you do look at that, it's funny that, because I was thinking about that the other day, funny enough, and I sometimes think, should our heroes be that? Should our heroes be so approachable, or maybe this was the right time, because you had the time before that, and your grandfather, great grandfather, and they'll talk about, well, I went on the bus with my favourite, and you're thinking, no, that shouldn't have happened. It's like now there's a period of time in the early Premier League where you see footballers and you see like, where are they now, and they're working in like supermarkets, and you're thinking, no, they shouldn't be working, they should be doing something else. So this was sort of in the middle, I suppose. The players were still quite relatable. You could probably still meet them on certain nightclubs in Liverpool on a night out and have a laugh with them. And whereas now they're so superstars. So I suppose this time was they seemed to have everything they needed. They all had nice clothes and nice cars, but they just weren't, I suppose, that far away from. I suppose it was a dream that was reachable for the normal person.
Yeah, they were definitely, as you mentioned, they were within reach. All you had to do was go to the Conti on a Tuesday night,
Conti, yeah,
and they were all there. And yeah, they did drive nice cars. I mean, Adrian Heath talks about the Audi he had, and they drove nice cars. They went on nice trips.
Yeah,
but I think that it wasn't. They didn't have houses in Dubai. They maybe, if they were lucky, they didn't have a flat in Portugal.
They didn't have offshore accounts.
No, and they had fun as well. It wasn't. There was no sports science. Yeah, they took it seriously, but I think there's a more sense of camaraderie, togetherness. They stayed at clubs longer. Generally, a lot of them came through, as we know from being young kids. It wasn't just 3 years here, 3 years there, 3 years there, and that kind of career. They were. I know it's a cliche, but I think that was a band of brothers. That group of players.
Well, you say that. I mean, they had fun. No social media, because you forget about that. You forget about, I suppose, how guarded footballers have to be now, because every little thing they do can be caught on camera, and anyone can go and make money out of it. Everyone. But in those days, you could go and have a drink in a pub or a club and just enjoy yourself and not have to worry about that extra side. And there's many stories about footballers, and as you say, I mean, people like Pat Nevin tend to disappear for a few days, come back and play on the Saturday, be right as rain, and no one worried, because he did his job on a Saturday. Whereas now you look at people like, let's say, Jack Wilshere or someone like that, and it's scrutinised all the time, and you don't even, sometimes there's no even consideration of how he plays on a Saturday. It's all what's in the papers. And these guys must have just had that freedom, and as you say, must have loved that freedom to enjoy themselves.
No, I mean, what you said about social media is, completely spot on. It's so unforgiving now, and we move from one little outrage to the next, and everyone gets so angry about stuff. Whereas there were no phone cameras then. Maybe somebody might have been out with his Polaroid, but they could just go out and have fun. When we won the league in '87, Adrian Heath in the book talks about Howard Kendall being sat on the coach back from Norwich, just in his underwear, the shirt's off, the trousers are off, glass of wine in his hand. Imagine if Pep Guardiola does that, or God forbid, a certain Mr. Klopp, in his undies on a coach next May, and that would be, worldwide news. It would
be. So, who was the first player then you approached to do the piece for this, or did you get in touch with everyone separately at the same time?
It was a kind of bit by bit process. There were certain people I had in mind initially. Paul Power was actually the first one I approached, because what I hoped to do with the book was to speak to some of the players we haven't really heard from in the last 30 years, because we've had a long time to remember.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
And clearly there's some people who still work at the club, like Sharp, Kevin Sheedy, who we all love.
Yeah.
And they're quite visible still, so I thought, why not speak to some of the ones who Evertonians haven't really heard from. So Paul Power was the first one. I went over to see him in France, where he lives now. Paul Wilkinson was pretty early doors as well. We met in the glamorous setting of a service station well,
that's where all the deals used to be done, so that's actually quite that.
No brown paper bags there or anything. But so they were quite early on. Kevin Richardson was quite early on, up near Middlesbrough, in some posh coffee shop, because he works for Newcastle's youth department now, so he travelled down to meet me, and it moved on from there. Kevin Ratcliffe, Mark Higgins, Inchi when he was over from the States before Christmas last year, Pat Van Den Hauwe, and it all fell into place gradually. Because
you're right what you say there, we do hear a lot of the same voices at the period, and obviously, as you said, people work for the club and you hear that all the time, but there are those players like Kevin Richardson, Paul Power, who were huge part of these. Paul Power, you can't underestimate what a good signing that was, just for literally just for the one season or so, and come in and make such an impact on. I mean, I know 85 gets talked about a lot because that's our most glorious season, but 87 is such an unbelievable season for Everton Football Club. The injuries, and a lot of it's almost forgotten because there was that TV ban, and you've got these scratchy videos of Everton's own TV gantry, which was where it was in the ground is one of the. I would never have wanted that job. It was perched under the main stand. The thing is, it's still there, I think, and that's a lot of that season is forgotten about because we all see the Norwich game and Pat van der Now scoring the goal, but people like, I think it was Kevin Langley and people like that who had to be big parts of that season, and as you say, Paul Power was one of those big parts.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Langley actually made more league appearances than Peter Reid that year, which is incredible. You know, and he ended the season being relegated with Man City. But Paul Power, I mean, he'd been Man City all his career, never won anything. He turns up at Everton, expecting to be a bit part player, and he played 40 league games. And at his house in France, he's still got the trophy for Supporters Player of the Year.
Oh, brilliant.
You know, he came down after. I stayed a night with him, kind of went out for dinner. Bit of wine flowed, so he told loads of great stories. The next morning he came down with some cuttings, and he's still got the Liverpool Echo kind of, you know, 6-page commemorative thing on the trophy, title win, and in the centre page is Power and the Glory of Paul Power, and that means something to him.
That's brilliant, that though, because he is someone we don't really hear from at all. As I say, it's all the same people you hear from. You know, a lot of them made a career out of it. And as I say, he's someone, and that's what's brilliant about this, is that there are those stories. Paul Wilkinson, another one. I think didn't he play well against us for Grimsby in the next minute? You're back. I mean, because that was the big thing. I mean, we've got younger views that obviously you've grown up with transfer windows, but again, that was one of the big things then, wasn't it? If someone played well against you on the Saturday, say in the FA Cup, by the Monday he could be, you know, signing for you if the manager took a fancy to him. And again, he's another one who popped up with influential goals, great mullet, and was just another little cog to what we needed at the time, when players had to be really adaptable as well, because obviously only 2 subs as well made players like him, players like Kevin Richardson, Alan Harper. They were so important to that, especially the 85 and 87 because of the sub rule.
Yeah, but in fact there was one sub, and in Richardson's case, I think Richardson was completely invaluable with Harper. Richardson was saying that in the book that I think he came back from injury in the run-in in 85, scored 2 goals at Southampton, where we hadn't won for something like 14 years. So big win down at the Dell, which was, you know, a difficult place at that time. And then Everton went to Bayern Munich, and he got dropped. So we didn't even get on the bench. So Alan Harper took the place on the bench because there was just one person who could, you know, be involved along with the 11, and because that 11 was almost set in stone by then. Wilkinson himself said that, you know, if it was nowadays with 5-6 people on the bench, he'd have, you know, happily stayed at Everton for years. But players then wanted to play. I mean, Inchie says one thing that really struck me was that, you know, Inchie wanted to leave Everton in the Lineker season because he wasn't playing in his favourite position. And Inchie played about 50 games that year. He started 35 of them, but he was that, you know, players had to play in their position, and they weren't just happy to be in and out. It was very different.
And I suppose as well, you've got to consider things like win bonuses and goal bonuses in that as well, because I suppose that was the incentive. I mean, again, it's something we've lost in the modern football. You know, the incentives for playing well was so important then, and something we've lost now. And you know, Mark Higgins is in the book. I mean, he's a tragic story, isn't he? He really is. It's so sad. I know he's back at the club now, but you know, I've met him. He's a lovely fella, but he missed out on this by you know, being so unfortunate with that injury, which again now could be something that, you know, could be solved. And his story's so unique. Club captain to almost nothing within a year.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps that was one of. I mean, I love some of these stories for different reasons, but that's one of my favourite ones, just because of the poignancy of it, and because of the way Mark tells it. You know, he's a lovely fellow, as you say, and he could have been the man. You know, he would have been Kevin Ratcliffe, but for this injury, which he played through injuries. You know, he talks about the injections he went through. This was somebody who loved Everton and, you know, went through all the pain barrier to play for us. And it was a different era because, you know, he's there at Wembley, we win the cup, and Ratcliffe goes up to lift the cup and Mark Higgins walks down the tunnel. Whereas, nowadays you look at the example of somebody like John Terry, obviously a completely different kind of human being, but he's a proper gentleman, Mark Higgins, and he went and delivered the speech at the banquet afterwards, which can't have been easy.
No.
And there's the great story about the fact he ended up playing against us for Man United after he went to Old Trafford because Hauwe didn't want it. When he got fit again, Howard had enough players.
Yeah. Didn't
get the chance to, so he calls up Ron Atkinson and says, can I come and train with you? And he ends up playing against us in Easter Monday '86. And that 0-0 draw, we missed out on the league by 2 points, and he was man of the match.
Cheers, Mark. Is there you spoke to many. Is there anyone that you couldn't get that you really, really want? Is anyone's story out there that you're thinking, I want to hear from them, but you just couldn't get them?
Well, I mean, Peter Reid, was the heartbeat of that team. Peter provided the forward. I mean, I would have loved to have sat down and kind of had 2 or 3 hours with him, but in the end, we had a chat on the phone for the forward instead. So Reid, he's probably the one that got away in that sense. Yeah. But
I mean, I suppose we've all heard this story as well. I mean, because there's a lot of, and there's a lot of other people involved that that you look at, and as you say, there's people out there you hear all the time, like John Bailey, and these were big characters. I mean, someone like you mentioned '86 there, and someone like Gary Lineker. I mean, he's one, isn't he? Who you look back and you just think, what could have been? If he'd stuck around another season. But obviously, he's another case of players wanting to go into Europe, because I mean, again, you mentioned earlier the European ban. That's another sort of the loss of so many of these top players. You look at it and you think, what could have been? Even Gary Stevens going to Rangers, Trevor Steven going to Rangers as well, and Adrian Heath going to Spain. Obviously, Hauwe Kendall going to Spain again. There's so much more, isn't there? To just, I know people look at the 3 years and go, it was a fantastic 3 years, but it's so much more than that. It is that question that still haunts Evertonians, and I'm sure haunts the players as well. What could have been?
Yeah, I mean, Lineker, I went to speak to him at the BBC just before they filmed Match of the Day one. It was one Saturday evening last January, and he spoke about the European ban clearly was a factor in him leaving. Okay, Barcelona, bigger club. His salary was he went from about 100 grand a year to 250 grand a year with that move. So even if we had Europe, but however, all the other players you talk about, is completely right. The manager left because of Europe, and you don't want to sound like kind of a whinging get Evertonian who just goes on about something all those years ago. But clearly, every club has an opportunity, a moment in time, and that was ours. And you think about Villa, who won the European Cup, with by comparison a good to average team, or middling to good team. Villa won the league. The next season they were 11th, whereas we won the league. The next season we were 2 points off winning it again and got to the cup final. So we were a completely different animal. So if Villa could win it, then you think
definitely
we had something.
I mean, what do you think that is the major? I mean, it is the major factor, I suppose. But do you think there's any more to, I suppose, the sudden downfall of the club?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've spoken to in the book to Pat Nevin, who was really insightful about the latter, the end of that 80s period, and to Colin Harvey, of course, who tried to marry the players he brought in with the lads who'd had that success in the mid 80s, and you just had it's a very kind of, sadly, these are human beings, and it's our football club and we worship it, but these are lads, and the lads who didn't get on, and ultimately they were human, group of mates. More people come in and the mates don't get on with the others, and it just didn't work out.
Just didn't gel, because as you said, there was that 11 is almost fixed in most Evertonians' minds. You can't even sort of go through your best ever 11 without wanting to default straight to that 11, because the players are so good, from Neville Southall all the way through to Andy Gray and Graham Sharp, if that's your starting 11. But you're right, because I remember when Pat Nevin was signed, and there was the picture of the programme: Pat Nevin, Tony Cottee, Neil MacDonald, and that Stu McCall as well. And you had that four. They were supposed to be sort of the next evolution, and it just never quite worked. But in terms of today, it's not that far off. 89, a cup final. There was another cup final as well, but no one talks about that one. Finishing like 4th, but it almost felt like that wasn't good enough. Yet we just drifted, and like we said before, we missed the boat then when the Premier League started. For whatever reason, we just weren't, even though we helped implement it, we just didn't get on that boat. And whereas other clubs like Man United started building the ground, and we were sort of still wondering, I think, maybe what could have been.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose John Moores was getting on, wasn't he? By the end of the 80s, start of the 90s, and there was that strange period of limbo where there was no direction at the top of the club. But you're right. I mean, Colin Harvey, who it was such a pleasure to sit down with, he spoke about the way it kind of started to go wrong, and he still really, it still hurts him the way it went, because there's no bigger Evertonian.
No, and he's, you don't hear that much from Colin anymore, and he obviously, with Howard sadly passing, he's someone who you have to listen to, especially for this period, because obviously being in charge of the youth team and seeing so many of those players come through, and then the assistant manager, and then obviously being the manager again, and then going back to the assistant manager, he's seen it all the way through to the other end. So I mean, he's a massive voice. So I mean, who did you have sort of most fun talking to?
Well, Inchy's such a bubbly character, a massive enthusiast, and still, he still loves Everton, and he talks like a fan. So you can't help but be drawn in by that, and you speak to him for 2 hours, and it feels like you're in the Florida sunshine. I've
done that myself. On Skype, you can feel the rays burning. Very quickly, the players involved are Mike Lyons, Kevin Ratcliffe, Kevin Richardson, Adrian Heath, Mark Higgins, Derek Mountfield, Pat van den Hauwe, Paul Wilkinson, Gary Lineker, Paul Power, Pat Nevin, Neville Southall, and Colin Harvey, which is just some of the greatest. And it's funny, Pat van den Hauwe, because when you were talking before about players and not hearing the stories, very interesting. I think when Pat van den Hauwe came back from South Africa, and he said he didn't realise that Evertonians still remember them. I thought that was a really interesting line, like almost like he did somehow football hadn't got to South Africa, because he's one of the most remembered players ever, because he was part of that 11, and yet he comes over, and now, luckily enough, now he's back at the club. So it's interesting, that side of things as well. I
mean, it means a lot to him, an awful lot. I think he was really, and I'd heard this before I sat down with him, he was genuinely touched and surprised when they had that reunion in 2010, 25 years on, and he went into the room and they were all chanting his name, and because he's led such a life that's utterly different.
He was a gardener. South Africa.
Well, he was lots of things, and yet everyone still just remembers him. And because we forget that these people, they do lead other lives apart from that moment. We have fixed in our memories.
You just, and I was saying this, something go back to before. You've got this idea of your heroes, like sort of happily living their lives for the rest of your, and even not even this era. I remember hearing of a hero of mine from the Premier League era, and he worked as a forklift driver, and I was horrified. Just like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be working somewhere at a football club or doing something, I don't know, living off all the money you didn't earn. But it horrified me, that. So it is really interesting, some interesting stories. Brilliant present for your dad for Christmas, for the younger ones, and obviously our older watchers just relive some great times. And on the back, an Everton bobble hat, which I've come back now.
The classic hat,
They've come back. My missus has got one of them, so she'll be delighted to see that. So Simon, fantastic to have you in.
Thank you. And
it's a brilliant book, even just from the front, and in the inside, the classic home kit from '85. So absolutely brilliant. Written by an Evertonian, published by an Evertonian as well, which always helps James. So fantastic to have you in. Thanks for coming in.
Very much.